Hello, this is Lecture 13 on the general epistles and the book of Revelation. I'm not going to have my picture in the corner on this one because there'll be lots of videos we're watching, and I figure you can focus more on that rather than on my face. Let me give you a little timeline first. Now, realize that this is a rough outline, and we can't prove really any of this, but I think it's helpful to look and kind of see when the different books of the New Testament were written, roughly. So if you'll notice, here is the historical Jesus timeline. You know, Jesus died maybe 30, maybe 33, around there. And so we don't actually have the first writings that make it into the New Testament until 4950. So the letters of Paul that most people decided are genuine were written between 50 and 64, 65, before he died in Rome. Right around that time, we think the Q source that was sort of behind Matthew and Luke was written in that same time period. The Gospel of Mark may have been written closer to 70. And Matthew and Luke later on as well. Now, the letters that are identified as from Paul that may not actually be finished by him or written by him, like the pastoral letters we're going to talk about in this lecture, could have been later after Paul died. So they could even be as late as 90 CE, and then the general epistles that we'll look at today also have a wide range. I really don't think any of them were written as late as 100, but some scholars do, but it definitely being the latter half of the first century. And then Revelation, again, is a later book. We're not sure exactly when, maybe between 80 and 95 during the reign of Domitian. Some people place the Gospel of John very late. I would not necessarily place it this late, but definitely after Matthew and Luke and Mark. So hopefully that's helpful to you. The other information here on this timeline is just other historical things and archaeological discoveries that we've made from certain time periods. So moving on. I like that your textbook, Christianity, talks about the different books in this section by topic. And so there's several problems that the early Christians faced in the first century. And a lot of the letters in the New Testament address these problems. So Hebrews and James, along with some other topics, address Christian complacency, basically the idea that people are Christians in name only, and they haven't continued the sacrificial, loving, compassionate life that God has called them to. They're kind of getting lazy, maybe, in their faith, and so Hebrews and James address that problem. There is a development of church structure that happens in the first century, revolving around deacons and bishops and elders, and we read a lot about those new structures in 1 Timothy and Titus especially, but 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus are considered the pastoral epistles, maybe written by Paul, maybe written by somebody who was Paul's apostle later, or Paul's disciple. Now, 2 Peter is written with several topics in mind, but especially it talks about the question of why hasn't Jesus come back yet? Because many early Christians thought it was going to happen in their lifetime, and so 2 Peter is probably written quite late, and so it addresses the issue. Okay, why hasn't Jesus come back? And the parousia, of course, is the word we use to describe Jesus' second coming. Heresy was probably one of the biggest problems that the early church faced, and the letters of John and Jude, and also the pastoral letters talk about this, address these false teachings that are spreading around because they don't have a canon yet. The early Christians did not have a New Testament yet, and so it was hard to keep people believing orthodox beliefs or passing down correct beliefs from Jesus and Paul and the apostles. And so just new ideas kept getting mixed in with early Christian ideas. And so the early Christian leaders had to correct a lot of these heresies or false teachings throughout the first century. And then the last problem is the hostility that many Christians faced from the Roman Empire. There were several emperors who went after Christians and persecuted them at various time periods. And so First Peter and Revelation both address Christians who are encountering hostility and persecution from the Roman Empire. So we're going to go through each of these briefly, very briefly, and we'll look at some of the videos as well. Hebrews, I'm not going to make you watch the video on Hebrews, but if you would like to, you can always go to the PowerPoint that I put up in the weekly folder, and you can click on this Hebrews video and watch it. But basically what Hebrews is a series of sermons, really. It's not written in letter form per se, but it's probably a series of sermons given by somebody who is writing to a group of people or preaching to a group of people who need a wake-up call. They are maybe facing a little bit of pressure or persecution, and they're also becoming maybe apathetic in their faith. And so they need some encouragement and maybe a little poke in the rear would be a good way to say it, to tell them they need to get on and start living their Christian life in radical, committed ways, instead of just going along with the flow of society. So the main ideas of Hebrews are one, that Christ is superior to all other religious symbols and people. So it's very focused on Jesus' superiority, and that really probably is to answer, maybe some of the questions that early Christians were having about other religious ideas and symbols, like ideas from the Old Testament, like priests and sacrifice and things like that. Ideas from the Second Temple period, that time period between the Old Testament and the New Testament was written, when the Old and New Testament were written. Maybe the worship of angels and things like this. So all throughout this series of sermons, or this letter, Christ is being portrayed as superior to everything else. And so then his argument near the end is that the Christian faith is worth holding on to, because Christ is superior to all other religious people or symbols throughout Old Testament times. The faith in Jesus is worth holding on to no matter what happens, no matter if it gets hard to become a Christian, no matter if you're persecuted, no matter if you lose interest and start floating away to a different religion. No, Christian faith is worth being faithful to. And there are some warnings throughout this whole letter about don't lose your faith, don't lose your faith. It's going to be destructive for you. But then the other idea is that the faith in general is not a passive idea, something you just think or believe, but it's something that is a journey. A faith is a journey you move on. It's an active, forward-moving path that takes you closer and closer to God and to God's will. I think we're going to have time to watch this video. Oh, you know what? We're not going to have time to watch this next video. But it is okay, because I will talk about James. And actually, we might just skip James' video, so we can go ahead and finish James here. So James is actually one of my favorite letters. It is really practical. This also could have started off as a small sermon called a homily and then was made into a letter later on, but it's really about the practice of faith. It was most likely written by James, who actually was a brother of Jesus. So although Jesus' brothers did not follow him while he was teaching on earth, they did become believers afterwards. And James, in particular, became the leader of the church in Jerusalem after the Holy Spirit came on the Jews, the Jewish believers in Jerusalem. So he was known as James the Just, was a really amazing leader, church leader. The traditions about him say that he had knees like a camel because he spent so much time on his knees in the synagogue praying for his fellow brothers and sisters. And so obviously a really kind, compassionate man. But he writes this to a group of people, it seems like, have stopped living out their faith with lives of compassion and with lives of love. So the main ideas that he emphasizes throughout are the practice of faith, and he will call this works sometimes, which can sometimes be thought of as a negative term in our days, because it does seem to be against what Paul says when Paul says our faith our salvation comes through faith and through God's grace, not through the works that we do. But here James is not saying that you earn your salvation by works, but that faith and doing an active life of faith, participating in works of faith, go hand in hand. You can't have faith without actually letting that faith play out in the way that you live your life. And so it is really important Christian idea that I think can help us today as we figure out how to follow God in our society. Another little piece of James talks about the testing or the trials that happen to people. And he talks about how important these times of trial can be to people, that it produces character in people, that you grow as a person when bad things happen to you. And I think this is something that we have lost in the contemporary church. We, pray for, bad things not to happen to us. And we, get really upset with God when there are trials or testing in our lives. Instead of looking at it the way James does, and that is to say, you know what? Life is hard, and these trials that we go through actually make us stronger, and they can help us focus more on God and help us, focus on the humility that we need to live lives of love. And so I think he has a really great point about trials. He also talks about wisdom and the wisdom of God and how it should be practiced in our lives, and especially when it comes to the words that we use. The speech of Christians can often be so destructive to other people, judgmental or criticizing or whatever. And he says this is not the way it's supposed to be. We are supposed to build one another up with the words that we say. And so there's this beautiful section where he talks about the power of the tongue and how it can bless someone, bless God in one moment, and then curse another human being in the same moment. And he said this is not the way it is supposed to be. I think there's so much wisdom in what he says here. When you think about the prevalence of suicide in our today's society, and you think about many, especially teenagers and young people, will commit suicide because they've been bullied, because of things that people have said to them. Like, words have great power, and they have power to destroy other people. And so we must be careful in the words that we say and the words that we write or type when we're on social media. So I think even though James is writing in the first century, he has many things to say to the 21st century. And the last topic is one that I think is another very contemporary topic, and that is the idea of poverty and wealth. Here James talks about how churches in his time tended to favor the wealthy. They would bring them in and sit them in the best place and suck up to them because, maybe they would give money to the church, but that they didn't treat people who were poor in the same way. And so he calls this favoritism, and so he condemns the people that he's writing to for doing this. And I think it's really important as we think about our modern churches. It's important for us to realize that the people that Jesus spent the most time with, the people that the early Christians told us that we should be helping, are not the wealthy, successful people who have power. It's the people who are in need, the people who are poor, the people who are oppressed and marginalized. And James reminds us of that, reminds us what Jesus says about helping the least of these. And this is a good message for us today as well. So what I want you to do for your reflective assignment this time is to go to these sections in James that I have put down here. So the section on the practice of faith in James 2, the section on trials in James 1, the section on speech in James 3, and then the section on poverty and wealth and favoritism in section 2. And I want you to read each of these sections. And after you read them all, I want you to answer these two questions. What parts of this practical advice do you relate to most, and why? And what might need to change for you to follow the advice? So basically, even though there's 4 different sections, you're going to read them all. I want you to pick one that speaks to you the most and write what a part of this advice makes the most impact on you, and how might you change your life to follow the advice that James has here. So go ahead and do this. We're about to finish this video and then come on back for the second video on general letters and Revelation. Thank you very much.